really appreciate it, Dr. Gilmartin, I should say, because
Well,
when I
Kevin's
first
fine. Thank you, Shahid. I appreciate
okay,
it.
when I first met you, or when I first read this book, Emotional Survival for Law Enforcement, I was blown away. I remember somebody put it on my desk and said, "Hey, you might want to take a look at this." And this is 2015, 2016, maybe. And
Mhm.
you just weren't hearing this kind of verbiage, just kind of language on the job. People weren't sitting around a roll call talking about hypervigilance or emotional regulation. That was foo-foo stuff. And to
Mhm.
read the book and to read your experience personally and then professionally as a researcher, and I was like, wow, this makes so much sense. And I just
Thank
don't
you.
know. Yeah, I just don't know why it took so long for this kind of. I feel like you hear it everywhere now, but I feel like you're kind of the godfather of this. You were writing books on this before anybody was talking about officer wellness or anything like that.
That just means I'm an old guy. That's all that means.
I appreciate it. So if you don't mind, I like to just kind of get into your book because again,
Okay.
me being a fan first. One of the things I've when I read your book and I highlighted was about hypervigilance. Nobody ever talked to me about that, and I was in the military. I'm a combat veteran. So being on patrol, having to keep your head on a swivel, look for potential IEDs, sniper fire, then come home and become a police officer, and it's kind of the same thing, although you're not getting shot at every day. But that hypervigilance for me created a lot of just a lot of poor emotional regulation, and I was running the gamut on emotions and anger and frustration. I couldn't figure out what was going on. Then I read your book and I'm like, this makes complete sense. So from
Mhm.
your perspective and what you've learned while you wrote the book, but even more so, I think in the last 10 years has this become really a problem with recruitment and retention. What has been an issue with hypervigilance that officers struggle to understand or implement to balance themselves out?
Well, you know, we use that term hypervigilance because that's exactly what takes place when people are in environments of risk, with a risk-based environment. And it's interesting because I'll have clinicians who are well intentioned, but not particularly culturally competent around people who work in harm's way. They say, how do we reduce the hypervigilance in our officers? And I say, I don't want to reduce the hypervigilance. Hypervigilance is just the neurological aspect of officer safety. It'd be like asking me, well, how do we make our officers less safe? And I want to make them more safe. I want their heads on a swivel. I want them listening, watching, not taking anything as a neutral. And that's a neurological state. The brain's engaged, the neurons are firing, the person feels alive. The sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system is engaged. And you really have to have that phenomena controlled while you're an officer. You don't want to be lackadaisical and laid back and and pretending everything's going to work out, because sometimes it doesn't work out. And we want our officers to have the utmost chance of coming home at night. And it doesn't matter whether we're talking about patrol officers or we're talking about dispatchers or we're talking about a bunch of young grunts out there in the military. They are in harm's way, and the number one issue is to get them home safely. And to do that, they have to go into this elevated level of intense alertness. um, Hypervigilance is the term we use. And one of the problems that I've had discussing that concept is we want to discuss psychological variables. You talk about wellness in the United States, and they all want to bring in the psychologist. They want to bring in the counselor. Very, very, very necessary people. But public safety is a biological. You're going into harm's way. Your body's alive. It's energized, and that causes a cascading of lots of changes in the person, lots of changes, and many of those changes are very good in the short term. They get you through the incident. They get you through the call, but they're just devastating in the long run. You have to do them, but if you're going to teach somebody street survival, you have to teach them emotional survival, and I don't think we do that real well.
You touched about something about the clinicians and that cultural competency. And I'm always fascinated about this and curious your perspectives. How much of a gap do you think exists between clinicians who are well educated, well experienced, but haven't experienced first responders, veterans, And how much has that gap closed maybe over the last 15, 20 years from what you've seen?
Well, I think the gap has closed. It's closed significantly. You have to remember, like I was joking earlier, I'm a really old guy. I started doing this in the early 1970s and have watched it proceed decade after decade. And it's interesting. Law enforcement was had mental health programs from the 1960s. We had mental health programs, but they were totally ineffective, I think, because they were predicated on the assumption that somebody would go in, create a therapeutic relationship with the counselor, and that's based on trust between the officer and the counselor or the therapist. Well, officer safety is distrust. It's viewing things through a filter of distrust. Trust gets cops killed, distrust keeps them alive. And the the fire department was very, very different than the police department. They came late to the game with wellness and mental health, way late to the game. And they approached it from 180 degrees different than the police did. This was just hit me about 3 weeks ago when they had that disaster at the Reagan Airport where the Black Hawk and the American Airlines crashed. The fire chief was giving a briefing maybe 12 hours later after the initial event, and he immediately said, "We have peer support teams, we have critical incident debriefing units here, and we encourage people, for the first responders and the community, to take advantage of it." As I was listening to that, all I could reflect on was back in 1982 when the Air Florida disaster, when the plane took off, it hit the bridge and went into the Potomac, not terribly far from where this incident occurred. At that point in time, there really wasn't an awareness of critical incident stress, and it occurred because one firefighter, one paramedic, Jeff Mitchell, was studying to be a psychologist, and he went around from firehouse to firehouse doing debriefings, which was part of the fire culture. And they did it by utilizing peers. And peers led the program. They had mental health professionals that were available, but the movement from the fire side of the house was primarily peer support driven. From the police part, it was 20 years of being clinician driven. And then all of a sudden, gradually, as the critical incident stress debriefing movement grew, the role of peer support for law enforcement grew. And now I think we're on, you wellness programs involve peer officers. It's very difficult to be willing to go in and speak to somebody, doctor such and such, I'm going to go speak to him. Well, it's a lot easier just to go have a cup of coffee with a peer support person and who's walked the walk that you are in. And I think we're finding that in public safety. We're certainly finding it at the VA and places like that to deal with the trauma of returning veterans. So, and we've made tremendous progress. And I'm trying to think, I've been in this field for close to
Long
50
time.
years,
Well,
real long.
I'm glad you brought up peer support because I think that is something that I've gravitated towards. I became a coach and started working with cops and veterans just one on one, and that really confidential, like you said, that peer space where it's like, hey, I've been there, brother, I've been there, sister. Let me share
Yeah.
a little bit about my journey to break the ice, but not beat you down with my details. And I love to hear about your experiences.
Yeah.
And I found that modeling that behavior, being a little vulnerable, and then building that trust, like I do want to hear what you have been through, and if you're not comfortable now, how about later I check in with you, and just building that and being consistent with that, I have found to be just as, if not more successful, and I'm not a clinician, than going to a therapist kind of begrudgingly and maybe somebody you don't have a connection with. I just find peer support to be an amazing resource. I'm not saying it's all the answers, but I
Well,
think
no,
it's a
it's not.
critical first step.
There's, they talk about the triad of mental health in law enforcement, and that's the peer support, the mental health professional, and the chaplain, all interacting and not competing. They're all there to help people, and we have just made tremendous progress. I, you know, it's the success. Um, is interesting to look at. I've been to a lot of major events over the decades. Remember going to Oklahoma City after the bombing and going to a couple of mass casualty shootings, 9/11 in New York City, the Boston Marathon bombing, um, and bunch of others. And when I get there, as each year would progress, I would say, God, I don't need to be here. There's wonderful clinicians, there's wonderful mental health teams here. So we're getting the big event. If there's a mass casualty event, I guarantee you, it's the rare organization that will not have mental health services there. We handle a big event well. What we don't handle well is just the daily drip, drip, drip of going out on the street, practicing hypervigilance, and then coming home to family or friends and having a balanced life. And we don't handle that. We handle traumatic stress well, but not just a little bit of, I'm pushing a patrol car for 10 hours. Now I have to go home and go over my son's reading. That's the stuff we're not doing well. And there's a biological component to that. We talk about that in the book, that biological roller coaster, and giving personnel the capacity to address that, I think is of benefit.
Yeah, that's a great point. I love that roller coaster, by the way, in the book, because that really resonated with me as well.
It's a simple concept, but I think it's powerful.
Yeah, for sure. The I'm a big personal accountability person. I mean, I think we all do our best when we're really looking inward and being self-aware and mindful to our limitations, our strengths, and really just trying to be the best we can be. I feel like that's our best. However, we know in police agencies you can only do so much as an individual, as an individual officer. What role do executives have in police departments, if any, in mental wellness? And what are your suggestions for kind of the next generation?
Well, this is that's a great question, and it's a tough question because the realities are, if you're blessed to work at an organization that has an insightful leader who is caring about his or her personnel and puts efforts into it, it's going to be a whole lot easier. If you work for an absolute jerk who's just a boss, who doesn't hesitate to let you know that they're the boss and you're not, well, you still have an obligation to take care of yourself. And it's very easy when you're talking with cops, they'll say, well, when are they going to change? If they know this stuff, when are they going to change? And I'll say, well, probably never. The guy's a jerk. He's been a jerk for 10 years. Do you think he's not going to be a jerk tomorrow? My guess is he's going to be a jerk as long as he's around. But what are you going to do about it? When are you going to change? Um, I do training, and I like to talk about emotional investment. You got 100 units of emotion. I know cops that put 90% of that emotion into the job, and they're drained when they get off duty, and they think they're tired. Well, when they actually look at hypervigilance, they understand that it is a pendulum. It's a physiologic state, and there's an after effect. And if we treat the after effect, which is a depressive like parasympathetic state, we can get that officer back up online, exercising, sleeping, playing golf, lifting weights, fly fishing, whatever it is they want to do. And so many police, they they get on the job, and dispatchers also, they get into the job, and they give 110% for the first 5 or 6 years, and they don't understand that the rest of their life has suffered. They might have cost them a marriage, it might have cost them physical fitness or spirituality or some major loss, and they don't know how to solve the problem. Well, you can't solve a problem if you don't know what the problem is, and that's what we found with the using hypervigilance as a starting point, because everybody agrees you got to be safe to be a cop. The safer you are, the better the cop you are. But officer safety comes with a price, and that's you have to clean up afterwards. You have to be able to get into a physical state where you're up and not in that depressed state, sitting there playing video games for 8 or 10 hours. And that's that daily transition from work to home that we don't address enough.
Yeah, very true. I'm just thinking about some of my personal experiences. And I remember my wife, 2019, 2020 was definitely a rock bottom time for me, and just piecing things back together. I just turned 40, trying to understand my life. I went in the military at 17, so everything in my adult life was service to others, and seeing some hard things along the way. And what she said to me, which I found interesting, is I just want you to be peaceful. Like wherever you're at, if you're with the kids or you're at work or we're on a date, like just I want you to be present and be peaceful and seem peaceful. And you just always seem like you're your head thinking about something else. And that was feedback I didn't know how to process when she told me that. Like, what does that mean? I want you to be peaceful. I'm happy. I'm a happy person. But I think we lie to ourselves pretty regularly because we don't want to face the truth. And the truth is, I'm not doing good, and I have no idea where to go next.
Well, uh, kind of looking at that question and verging back to what can supervisors do and executives do. I like to talk about when I go teaching at leadership academies. I have one coming up next week, and I'll always say leadership is fine, but you can't have leadership unless you have followership. And it doesn't, unless someone's willing to implement your program, you could just sit there and be in this confrontations, labor management head button. And a lot of organizations do that. Uh, we're only motivated by unmet needs. And so what are the unmet needs for police officers? Well, that tranquility that you're talking about is kind of nice, but in some ways it's naive. If I had my kids are grown, but when my kids were little and I'm taking them to the mall or I'm taking them to a park or even Disneyland, I'm not naive. I know there's evil in this world, and I don't want it to touch the people that I love. So your head is kind of on a swivel. You're not looking at things from a benign perspective. And most people think with probability thinking. Well, I should. We're going to have a podcast today. I should probably get there 20 minutes earlier. I should probably check out my microphone. If it's going to rain today, I should probably take a raincoat. That's how normal people think. If cops thought that way, they would say, well, I'm probably not going to be in a shooting tonight, so I'm not even going to bring a weapon. I'm probably not going to get shot, so I don't need to wear ballistic body armor. I can probably walk up on this car without any concern because there's probably not a gun in the car. And probability thinking works for everybody, but people who are in harm's way, and they have to use possibility thinking. Every encounter that you walk in has the potential for costing you your life. So you go from a question mark, you go right to the negative. You knock on a door, you step to the left or you step to the right, not because a round's probably going to come through the door, but because one's possibly going to come through the door. And we teach that mindset. And you have to, it's a very accurate mindset to get you through a dangerous encounter, to get you through a deployment, to get you through a shift. And it works very well in the short term, but it's devastating in the long term. We always for 30 years we've been playing this little word game, word association tests. And the classic word I flash up for cops is scout leader, and say, what's the first thing that comes to your mind when you see the word scout leader? And I always get the word pedophile, sex offender, child molester, pervert. I mean, that's overwhelming, the response that you get. And because that's the realities of their world. But what do you do with that cop when their 10-year-old boy wants to become a Cub Scout? How does he reconcile that? And it's very easy as a cop to view the world like it's one big felony in progress, and you're just driving through it. And it's pretty disconcerting to other people. I mean, you're in the bottom of that roller coaster. You're exhausted. You don't feel like doing things. And everybody else that shares that part of the life with you also suffers.
I found that cynicism is just a corruption waiting to happen amongst all your personal relationships, thinking that, everyone's out to get you, thinking, oh, this situation's going to hell. And that just devastates, I think, relationships over
See,
time, interpersonal
well,
relationships.
I see. I view it the same way, but I think cynicism is absolutely necessary for cops. Cynicism is distrustful of human nature and motive. Um, when you're in an encounter in your cop role, trust is not your friend. You know, if you see me on a traffic stop, reach for the glove box, you're not going to trust I'm looking for my driver's license or registration. You can say, "Excuse me, sir, get your hands away from there, please, so I can see them." Uh, because trust is naive risk taking. Distrust keeps you alive. And the problem is we learn that and it keeps us alive in the short term, but it's so devastating in the rest of life. There's been an interesting kind of phenomena uh, up until about 5 years ago or so, when this war on cops started, where we had the defund the police and all the anti-police rhetoric and the lunatics out there screaming about defunding police. Prior to that, for 30 years, we have decreasing felony death rates in law enforcement. Cops were being killed less frequently in line of duty felony deaths because they had better communication systems, they had better weaponry, they had better training, they had ballistic body armor, they had better medical response. So whereas we're decreasing felony death, we're having an increase in officer-involved suicides. And I don't think that's just an artifact of reporting. I think that we ask an awful lot of our officers and our dispatchers, and we work them into just emotional exhaustion, and then there's no room for joy in their life, and we start seeing people in their latter 20s who question the value of their life, and it's heartbreaking to me to see that. And so my interests are in that day-to-day transition between work and home, because if we take care of that, we take care of their life. And but when it all goes back to your first question on hypervigilance, you have to be hypervigilant and you have to be cynical. Trust is not your friend.
So if you could think of some of the examples maybe you've seen in your research, your life, just personal observations of officers that were really hyper vigilant at work, maybe a little distrusting, really good at their job, and then they came home and they were able to be the opposite and be present with their family. I'm sure that's a really hard thing. I'm working on that myself right now, but and I made a lot of progress, but it is an amazing dance. I found it's an art. It's very humbling, and I'm just curious what you've seen in that.
Well, I've seen one very clear encounter that it's biological, and if you conceptualize it as biological, we break the cycle. There's been lots of research in the past decade on what's the effect of moderate exercise on mood elevation, and Duke University did a series of studies, and they found that walking on a treadmill briskly for 20 minutes had the exact same antidepressant effect as antidepressant medication and counseling. They were all equally effective in reducing depressive ideation. And when I look at post-traumatic stress disorder, it clearly it's an anxiety disorder and it has a depressive component to it. But traditionally, we undervalued physical exercise. We undervalued activity. And when I get to be king of the world, every cop will finish every shift with at least a half hour of mandatory physical fitness training before they go home to their families, go back to their personal life. And
I love that. That actually brings me to my next thing. Physical fitness, I think, is so important, like you said. And I've also been on this journey of sleep, and I never was a good sleeper. Maybe get 3 to 4 hours a night. And it's not even great. I'm not in REM sleep or REM sleep, but what have you seen or experienced over the last maybe 15 years that was earlier different than your research, or maybe it's been consistent, that sleep is such a big and important driver, and we just maybe only now are talking about it kind of in mainstream, but it really is for me, I've learned it dictates my moods tremendously if you got good sleep.
It's the huge 500-pound gorilla in the room. 80+% of police sleep 4 to 6 hours a night. 80%, that means almost the entire population. And you'll virtually never see mandated sleep hygiene training. We'll have mandated firearms training. We'll have mandated training in terms of dealing with different particular groups and how we deal with victims, which is all necessary. But when you compare a police officer, this is research by Dr. Brian Viola at Washington State University. When you compare a police officer to a shift worker on reaction time studies, judgment and reaction time, the police officer made 600% more judgment and reaction time errors. Now, in a laboratory, that's real interesting, but 600% judgment and reaction time errors at 3 a.m. in the morning um, is devastating, and it has huge consequences. And one of the sleep is one of the things that's very interesting to me, because as our officers make errors, they make judgment errors. We have to look at, why did they do that? Well, NASA was one of the first groups that were dealing with the impact of sleep on critical situations. And they require their astronaut candidates to sleep for 8 straight hours during the trip. If they can't do that, they're washed out of the program. And if they say that's because we cannot afford a suboptimal decision in space. Well, yet at the same time, we totally ignore that foundational laboratory evidence. It's beyond dispute that your judgment and your reaction time reduce as your sleep reduces. And it's not that you didn't get much sleep last night. It's that you, for the last 10 years, have adjusted to 4 to 6 hours of sleep, and you think you're doing fine, until we have a split-second decision to make. And many times we have officers that make less than optimal decisions. And yet I've had many cases referred to me over the years clinically because they think it's an anger management problem. And no, it's really a non-diagnosed sleep disorder. This guy thinks he can sleep 4 hours a night, and he's fine. And he can't sleep 4 hours a night. You'll show impairment, and that impairment will be in judgment and reaction time.
Yeah, I mean, so true. What do you think is the barrier for, you said it's the gorilla in the room or the elephant in the room, and I agree with you. What is the barrier from police executives on a whole, or just having these conferences, to just focus about sleep and that kind of, that part of it? Like, why don't we just have those conversations as much?
Police work is such a hot button. And by the time someone gets to be a police executive, they're the head of the organization, they're 2/3 politician. They wouldn't be there unless they were politically savvy and politically connected. It's just the realities. I'm not just talking about the pure politician, law enforcement type person, but and there's an awful lot of people who have a say in police departments. A lot of politicians that dictate policy and that are pretty ill-informed. They're just ill-informed. And we'll talk about cultural diversity. We'll talk about implicit bias, absolutely legitimate topics to be talked about. But I'm going to guess, as I travel around the United States and go from city to city, I don't need a roadmap to tell me about bias. It's not implicit, it's explicit. People of color have been denied opportunity, they've been denied employment, they've been denied education. I don't need a class to tell me an impoverished Black neighborhood versus a wealthy white neighborhood. I mean, I'd have to be blind if I didn't see that. And that occurred because of 400 years of systemic racism impacting the outcomes. It didn't occur because there's a 27-year-old cop who stepped out of the car at 3 o'clock in the morning and had to make a split-second decision. If there's an angry young man pointing a gun at him, it's probably going to be somebody from a subgroup that's already been victimized by systemic racism. It's not going to be an orthodontist for the most part. And so when we have these bad decisions by cops, they fall more heavily on the underrepresented subpopulations in our society. And so at a first brush, this cop must be racist because look at their conduct. Well, we all share that blame. All of society shares it. Until the goodies are distributed equally, our cops are going to be dealing with people who come from underrepresented societies more frequently. Just look at the homicide rates. Look at the victimization rates. And to me, we can do something about sleep. We can start addressing it right now, so that cop is less likely to make a suboptimal decision, which will probably disproportionately impact deprived communities already. So we'll sit and we'll talk about implicit bias as if we're going to accomplish something doing that, which we don't accomplish anything. I don't think doing it, but it makes people feel
Yeah, I
good.
agree with that.
Yeah.
Well, it's funny.
Uh,
Like I live in Pennsylvania, I work in Pennsylvania, so we take mandatory training every year, and great, useful classes that are necessary to keep your certification. But I've never seen one on sleep. I've never seen a mandatory training on officer obesity, which I think is a problem. And I think we just don't want to talk about it. We make jokes about it. But I think that emotional regulation is really tied to how we feel, how we fit inside our body. Are we out of breath all the time? Are we eating 12-inch cheesesteaks every night at midnight shift? I think we don't talk about that either. Like there's
on the
obesity
cheesesteaks, that's
that
a Philly thing, though.
yeah, you're
but
right.
but think of hypervigilance. The brain goes into elevated alertness. It's mediated by the sympathetic branch of the autonomic nervous system. It kicks out cortisol. That's that cortisol hits your liver. Your liver releases blood glucose. That's the energy that that you feel when you're in an encounter. But the pancreas at that point kicks out insulin, which grabs a bunch of this blood glucose and it infuses it in the lipid cell, the fat cells around the abdominal area. So when we start talking about cops getting fat, being in a hyper alert state alone will make you gain weight. That's the body's reaction to a stressful event. 40% of America's cops are considered obese. And to me, the health crisis for police is not that our cop, who was 175 pounds at the academy, is now 205 pounds and doesn't look good in the skinny jeans. It's that glucose being infused into the lipid cell eventually leads the officer towards type 2 diabetes. And we start seeing an increase in that disease. And until we start identifying and addressing that obesity is not acceptable, sleep disorder is not acceptable. We have to do interventions for our cops. We'll have our police die prematurely because of stroke and heart disease. And that incremental weight gain and the reduction of sleep are the two big red flags that hypervigilant officer safety is taking its toll on our officers. And just the sheer number of hours a week a cop works is unacceptable.
Getting back to the executive conversation, do you feel there's a moral responsibility or ethical culpability to executives modeling that sort of behavior? Like, hey guys, I'm going to try to sleep as best I can. I'm going to try to eat as best I can because I understand that I have a direct effect on you. Or is that just kind of hogwash, wishing fantasy stuff?
No,
Where do you see
I
that?
think true leaders, I think there's around this country, we have some wonderful law enforcement executives that they model it, they see it, they care about their men and women. Then we have some jerks that are just bosses. They have their way of doing it, and that's the only way it's going to be. Um, I don't know if I'd define it as a moral or ethical responsibility. It's just pragmatically, you have a bunch of pissed off cops, and they don't believe they're being supported. Someone's going to pay the price for that emotion those cops have, and it's not that they're going to go out and rampage and start putting the baton to people, but the first sign that a cop is not doing well is that they stop doing. You start seeing a significant reduction in self-initiated activity. You'll hear the officers say, "I handle my calls." That's all they do. I don't do any. The more you do around here, the more they'll screw with you. You never get in trouble for the traffic stop you didn't make. And these are acts of omission. And so communities suffer because the cops disengage. And right now, I don't think in all the years I've been around, I've seen a tougher time to be a cop than right now. People sticking cell phones in their face, idiotic politicians ranting about defund the police and vilifying the police for absolutely every encounter that transpires. And and the easiest thing for cops to do is to keep their heads down and disengage, which we don't want. So if someone's an effective leader, I think that they have to realize if I want to, if I want my vision as the chief to be successful, I have to help the people who are implementing my vision be successful. And so to me, it's a pragmatic situation. And when chiefs do that and executives do that, then we're raising the bar for services to the community.
So the recruitment and retention issue that's plaguing the profession right now, what's your perspective or insights on it? What's the reason? Is there more than one reason? And do you have any suggestions how we can get out of this and start having cops show up?
You know, I that's a tough one. That's a tough one. I was thinking about that. We have a young kid in my family who wants to be a cop, and I can't tell you that I'm encouraging him. I'm saying, that's a city that you live in. If you got in a tough situation, you wouldn't be supported in that city. If you want to consider these three other optional cities to apply as a police officer, yeah, you go for it. But if you talk to cops, 20-year cops, what advice would you give your son? Don't be a cop, be a firefighter. So, it says a lot. It says a lot that we can't attract people to this noble profession of law enforcement.
Yeah, it's interesting. My son is 15, my oldest, and we had this conversation recently. And he doesn't want to be a cop, but he's insightful. And he said, "Dad, like, what would your advice be, or what would you say?" And I said, "Son, you would really have to do your research on the political makeup of that community, who the police chief is, what are their insights. You have to talk to some cops, and it's not enough." When I first got hired in 2008, I was told you just take the first offer you get. And I got a couple offers. I just took the first one because that's how competitive it was. And now I feel like candidates have a little bit more. Hey, I was looking at Google reviews and people say, don't work here. It's a crappy department. Okay, why would I want to do that? And I feel like we have information at our fingertips and giving these general bullet points of advice when I do love the profession. It is a noble profession. It's a beautiful, rewarding profession, but it has its pitfalls that can change your life forever if you're not careful.
Well, I see this as a deficiency of leadership. They need to champion the men and women who work for them. And that's where that 2/3 politician thing kind of hurts them, because there's a lot of political influence in the country that is anti-police. There's a lot of anti-prosecution. A lot of this comes out of the open societies movement with the George Soros funded issues. Paying for the campaigns of prosecutors and looking at the vilification. I was working in one of our major cities, and I received an education because I had to be approved by that group. And they asked me, they said, do you think that anybody who was in the military should be permitted to be a police officer? Our position is that no veterans should be permitted to be in law enforcement. And that talking point just shocked me. I said, well, what do you base that on? Well, they're veterans and they're just killers. And what evidence do you have of that? And it became pretty apparent to me it was just a George Soros funded talking point, except it was picked up in cities across the United States. And I'm looking at thinking, well, retention. How often do you see people in retention? They're cops and they're 30 years old and they can tell you how many years until they retire. I'm getting the hell out of here. And then you look at recruitment, and we need to get our best and our brightest and to challenge them to be in law enforcement, lives of service. Same with teachers. How do we get people that want to teach or to be nurses? And some of those are a little easier, but there's a crisis in our country right now, bringing people into law enforcement.
Yeah, definitely. I agree. And I wrote a book about this. My general thesis was the reason we're having this issue in the military was going through the same thing until recently was, there are three tenets that I believe have to line up if you want to have a great, successful organization. You have to have great leadership. You have to have strong culture, which is really a derivative of good leadership. And then you have to have well leaders. And I kind of want to get to you on this next question is, And again, it's an uncomfortable topic for a lot of chiefs and executives, but I have found that we all come into this profession with a lot of baggage already, a lot of adverse childhood experiences. And it's largely why we choose these kind of professions. Why I chose the military policing is, I wanted to fix and be a fixer from some of the things I saw as a kid. And when you have these I won't even say unhealthy, when you have these perspectives and then you mix in the trauma of the job and the dysfunction of the job and sleeping 3, 4 hours a night, and then these same people are moving through the ranks, getting promoted, unless they heal themselves, they're now in charge making decisions and they're not really healthy. And I think there's a lot of those leaders like that, which I think is
Yeah.
also part of the problem. And how do we encourage or give those leaders permission to say, you know what, I'm 50 years old, I have a master's and a doctorate, I've excelled at everything I do professionally. Now I'm a chief of police of a 300 officer agency, and I come home and I drink myself and I go to sleep and I yell at my wife. I don't have a relationship with my kids.
Yeah.
Like, how do we get into that and fix that? I don't
Well,
know.
and we have made so much progress over the years that I've been here. There's still a long way to go, but we have to discuss it. We have to start looking at issues, and the whole idea of wellness. I like that. That's a relatively new term. For years that we talked about stress management, and now we're talking about wellness. Why are we having cops die of heart disease as young men and women? Why are these diseases impacting us? Well, they're diseases of adaptation. And we ask men and women to go into highly stressful encounters, and we need to support them. And executives have to appreciate what's transpiring. And I, I'm impressed by certain people just impress me. I'm going to embarrass the guy that I'm going to talk about right now, but I remember being at the Boston Marathon bombing. This is a long time ago, and Ed Davis was the commissioner of the Boston Police Department. Did just an excellent job. But the day of the shootout with the brothers, there was a lot of hundreds of cops were there at incident, and there was they, they had a vendor there that was feeding the troops. And I noticed how he went to the back of the line and he waited at the back of the line. And I saw some heads of some agencies, and some of them were federal agencies. They badged their way to the front of the line. And I noticed Commissioner Davis didn't eat until his men ate, until his troops ate. And I like that. And he went around and shook the hands when the SWAT guys came in out of the field after hours of searching building after building, looking for the two terrorists. Uh, he thanked them, and I'm thinking, these other guys are bosses. He's a leader, and you'll see other examples like that. There's some wonderful police executives that appreciate that. But when you're looking at as a profession, one of my another thing that really annoys me is we don't learn from history. We don't learn when we've done something right already. I look at the plight in New York City right now. New York City, if I have a job, I'm not going to New York City. I'm not gonna. But yet, my wife and I would love going there all the time for years. Catch a Broadway show, go out to dinner, walk around at night. There's no way I'm going to do that right now. But New York has a history under William Bratton back in the 90s where they reduced crime astronomically. The New York crime basically was eradicated in the subways of New York by just quality of life crimes. If you tolerate little things, you'll get big things. If you solve problems when they're small, they won't become large. And yet I look at New York, I look at Boston and the tremendous things that they did, but all of that was forgotten when 9/11 hit because all of our interests shifted from community-based city policing and community-based policing internally to the external threat of terrorism, and the resources went external, and we're in the situation we're in right now. But I'm thinking, well, why don't you just open your book and look at how you handled that 25 years ago? It's quite different than how you're handling it right now.
Yeah, that's a fascinating perspective. I think, I wasn't on this job in 2001. I was in the military and active duty. But I talked to cops who were on the street then. They said there was a noticeable change of talk about hypervigilance. Now they're driving around already with everything they had on their plate. On top of that, now they're checking every place of worship. They're checking every bag of trash on the side of the road to see if it's IEDs. And
Yeah. Yeah.
yeah, and it's crazy. You know, and I came back from Iraq in '05. I was there for the early part of the war, the conflict. And I remember coming home, was a cop 18 months later or 28 months later after I got home. And I remember being on field training program and listening to the different guys talk. And, you know, it was interesting. I was like, guys, I fought the enemy over there. These are not the enemy. These are our citizens. These are our brothers, sisters, neighbors, you know, colleagues. And I started to see that divide. It's like, well, that's a bad guy. Who's a bad guy? What is a bad guy? You know, and I started to see everybody's labeled as a bad guy, even though they could have been a good person who got a DUI.
Yeah.
And we love to put these titles. And I just don't know if it's always been that way in the profession or if 9/11 accelerated that.
Well, 9/11 added a pressure cooker. George Floyd added a pressure cooker. These, you know, before that, Rodney King added a pressure cooker way back. You know, those are events. There's always been critical buttons that got pushed and the blowback from society. But I really think that, you know, I can remember a long time ago. It was a long time ago. I was, you weren't even remotely born yet, but I was listening to Robert Kennedy Sr. give a talk. It was about a week before he was assassinated. And he said, every community has the police department that it deserves. And I was just a young guy, and I think, what does that mean? Every community has a police department it deserves. Because, well, when you look at, you support your police, you support your criminal justice system, you invest in those men and women, and they will invest in their communities. If you abuse them, if you ignore them, then that's the treatment you'll have in return. So when I look at organizations where they have nothing but angry employees, they earned that. That's reflective of their leadership model and or their boss models, maybe a better term. But when I look at cops, and that's been kind of my life's work. It's been, well, why are you so angry? What's missing in your life? We're only motivated by unmet needs, and you know, so many cops are not taking care of themselves today that you have these 30-year-olds fantasizing about, you know, why I can't wait till I can retire and I can get the hell out of here. I'm not going to put up with their crap, and only 20 more years and I can retire. It's like, dude, let's put your life. Let's get the reins on your life right now, and let's see what's happening here. And that's happening. I get so I'm so happy about what's happening with the wellness programs in law enforcement around the country. Every week I'll run into a program at some department that I didn't even know existed. And they're doing such wonderful work, and they got a relationship between the peer support people, the chaplains, the clinician, and you know, it's just refreshing to see that.
Yeah, I think it's really neat. I put together a course when my first agency I left in 2021. I took an early retirement to get into business, and put together a wellness class, like an 8-hour class, and started pitching it to different police departments. And it was great. And some of the feedback I got, all the feedback was amazing, but some of the scuttle or the criticisms were, you're not a clinician. What do you know about wellness? And I get all that. My whole presentation was from a place of lived experience. So I share what I went through. I share what I was feeling inside of me. I mean, I take people inside because I think that's really important, because all those cops in there with the crossed arms, but you know they're listening and going, oh, I'm like that too. Or when I go home and I can't wait to crack a beer to take the edge off. Like, how many cops can relate to that? So I think when you share those experiences, much like the peer support role, and give people permission, hey, here's what I learned, here's what I tried, didn't really work for me, or this did work. But I think that's, like you said, having those conversations is really important.
And caring. I mean, you have to have people in charge who care. And it's the little stupid things that, you know, I'm an old man, and I look back on my life, and I look at like stupid things that I'm a kid. I'm in the Marine Corps. I'm a kid. I'm in Camp Lejeune, North Carolina. I just arrived from out of Camp Pendleton, and I got there 2 days early before I had to check in. So I was stupid enough. I didn't realize you never do that because they're going to give you busy work to keep you occupied for 2 or 3 days. So I got stuck on guard duty, and I got stuck on this guard duty way out in this remote area on the base. And you didn't have winter jackets. Winter jackets were issued by your duty station. And I was just arrived. I didn't have a winter field jacket, but I got stuck on guard this meaningless task. I'm out there guarding a pine tree or something on this road that's pretty remote place. And it's snowing. It's colder than hell. It's snowing. And I'm walking back and forth, I don't know, maybe 8 hours, I think. I don't know what it was. But I didn't have a jacket. And a car passes like at 3 a.m. Car backs up, comes back up to me. And I'm thinking, oh God, what is this? And it's a lieutenant colonel. And I feel, oh, this is all I need. And he does all the stuff that lieutenant colonels do to screw with, lance corporals and stuff. And then he asked me where my jacket is. And I tell him I don't have a jacket. I just arrived today. Then he says, who is the officer of the day? I said, I don't know. I just showed up. They stuck me out here with a rifle, sir. I know nothing. I just got here. Well, he hands me his jacket. He takes the emblems off his jacket and just, I want it back clean. And he takes off. And I'm thinking, why did this guy care that this young kid freezing his ass off? Why did this guy stop his car, back up, inject himself into that situation? And I'm not any philosopher. I'm just happy I'm warm at this point. But about 20 minutes later, here comes this parade of cars. Out pops the sergeant of the guard, out pops the lieutenant, out pops all these, because he got back and it rolled downhill. And he chewed some ass on people that why you have a person out there ill prepared. And they gave me a jacket and they stuck some other poor 18-year-old out there guarding the pine tree. But that impressed me. And that's been, God, 60 years ago.
Wow.
But why did he do that? And that's because I'm convinced that's a leader. That's a guy that it doesn't matter what the battle plan is. It matters, are the grunts going to implement the battle plan? And
wow, what a story.
It's a nothing. I was out one night when one of our cops shot somebody, and it ended up being a justifiable use of deadly force. But you know how that works. The homicide detectives come out, the shooting team goes out, and they take the person's weapon. And then we had yet to implement a rollout gun. This cop just shot somebody, and all of a sudden he's out there, and they put the gun in the evidence bag. Well, this was a commander. He said, "Here, you take my gun. You'll probably need it more than I do." It shoots a little bit to the right, and so be aware of that. So I said, well, after he did that, the guy said, "Thank you, Chief." And he walked away. I said, "Bob, if that gun shoots a little bit to the right, why don't you just get the armor to work on it?" He goes, "I don't know how it shoots." He goes, I use it once a year and I have to go to the range. He said, but that kid needed to have it personalized, and he's very upset right now. And I wanted to know that the leaders around here care about us. And I'm thinking, that's a leader. That's another leader, And
you got to care. You said that right. You have to care to want to do the job. All the education, all the national academies you went to. If you don't care about leading the troops, you're probably not going to be that great at it, I'd imagine.
Yeah, and that just gives you information. The obligation is for you to take that information and to move it to assist your organization.
Exactly.
And you can't have leadership unless you have ethical followership. And what are the needs of those men and women that are under your command to do the job, and what takes place there? It's
fascinating. Can I ask you a question about your book?
Sure.
More on the logistics of it. I'm a published author myself. I have nowhere near the credits or the esteem that you have.
Your book right here. Don't be.
Oh, okay, all right. I want to know, I'd argue it's probably top 3 of all law enforcement books. I mean, it comes up in people's recommendation list and want list. And I'd be foolish to say like, wow, that would be awesome one day if that was for the case for me. But how did you plan to be like that, to write a book and get like that? Or was it just something that
No,
happened based on your life experience?
you know, the book is a funny deal. Uh, Everybody says they think that the book came very, very late in the game. I was training police for 25 years before the book arrived.
Wow.
And I had a guy I worked with. He said, Gilmartin, you need to write a book. I said, I don't need to write a book. I don't want to have any interest in writing a book. You need to write a book. So I said, okay, why do I need to write a book? There's tons of books out there. He goes, well, because when you die, all this stuff you talk about is dead too. You know, this hypervigilance and this roller coaster, these classes you teach and the cops like, they're when you die, this information dies. I said, boy, you're a positive person. He goes, don't you think cemeteries are full of dead people who never wrote their ideas down? I said, well, shit, I never even thought about that. You're just depressing me.
Smart.
But it made me think. I wanted to memorialize this stuff. So it started out just as a written lesson plan, a class per outline. And then we said, let's just move it into the publication realm, which we did. And it's been extremely well received. We're shocked that the book has been that well received.
What do you think it
It,
was that your book, was it the materials not something that was normal, or what have you, when you reflect and look back, like what do you think was one or two reasons why it really catapulted and became something well known?
I don't know. I think it's simple. I think that it's kind of if there's a rule of thumb that I have, it's that if you get it, that's because you probably lived it and if it made sense to you. I get criticized a lot for that book from mainly mental health professionals. They'll say, you know what, that book's overly simplistic, and you don't. It's which theory did you? And I said, you know what, it's not based on theoretical concepts. I didn't write that book so that I can become an assistant professor. The book was written to help cops, and it's based on what I observed, what I see cops living, and it's their story. It's really not mine. And so, but I still get criticized that it's simple-minded, and I always say, well, I'm kind of simple-minded, and it's if you don't solve the simple problems, you sure as hell not going to solve the complex problems. And
Yeah, that's interesting. I didn't know you had. I mean, I guess it's anybody that's successful is going to deal, I guess, some criticism, but I would not have expected that. I mean, it is a simple
well, I
read,
don't
but
get it from cops. I very rarely get a cop that comes up and says, that book, I read that book and it made no sense to me at all. I don't get that. I get emails daily. I get emails that'll say, I wish I had this earlier in my career. Or unfortunately, I'll get it from a spouse. There's, we got divorced and one of my friends said to read your book and I did. And I think if we knew this, our family would still be together. Those are the ones that motivate me to still get up and, do seminars and go out and speak at police departments and things.
wow.
Because I don't like hearing that. We do everything we can to get that information into people's hands. It's very simple stuff. That's
Yeah,
it's not
no,
complex.
I
Uh,
love it. I think it's great, and I'm grateful to be spending some time with you and talking to you about it. All right, last section here we have Dr. Gilmartin. It's called Five Questions, and it's a chance to get to know you personally, get to know a little bit about Kevin, the man, and the person. So you down for 5 questions?
it depends on the question.
They're easy. These are softballs. All right, question one. What do you enjoy doing in your free time?
Well, I got you. Obviously, I'm a really old guy. So that has varied over the decades. For about 30 years, I was an avid team roper and a calf roper. And so our life is, for many, many years, was based on horses. And the place we built as a lighted roping arena. And we would rodeo and do that for years and years. And then as natural aging comes in, yeah, I guess you can still rope, but you don't have the passion to get, drive 400 miles to rope a steer. Um, uh, I like to marathon run. It's I've run marathons for 40 years or so, and that's an important part of my life. And right now, fly fishing.
Oh,
I love to fly fish. So when I'm not doing the police psychology thing, I'm standing in the river someplace swinging a fly rod.
oh, I like that. I like that. Is there a favorite? This is a guilty pleasure question. Is there a favorite book, movie, or TV show that maybe you're a little embarrassed to say you love or that you're a big fan of?
Oof, boy, I don't know. Hmm. Obviously, a river runs through it. I was, but I think I'm a Westerner, so like recently, like a lot of people, got kind of into that Yellowstone addiction. So,
Yeah.
and
What do you think of that show? Do you like it?
oh, I loved it. I loved
Yeah.
it.
Did you watch
Yeah,
the ending of it, the season 5 or
I hated the ending of it.
yeah.
Yeah,
How
boy,
about 1923? Have you watched the prequel at all?
I have watched that. Yeah,
Yeah.
I like that. I
Yeah, I
like
like that too.
how. Well, I'm a history buff, so it talked about not everything's black and white in history. It talked about the absolute injustices done to the indigenous people of the West um, by Europeans moving westward. So I mean, it touched that, and I liked it. Yeah. But
Yeah.
I'm not a. I watch whatever's on television. It's like. What are we watching tonight, honey? Was my favorite question. you know,
That's fun. So how long have you been married?
50 years.
Wow, 50 years. Wow.
Just,
Wow. Incredible.
yeah,
Incredible.
I
If you
know.
could travel anywhere in the world besides anywhere in the United States, where's a destination maybe you haven't been to or one you love very much?
Well, one of the things that has happened, my career uh, has permitted me to travel a lot internationally, and I spent a lot of time in Australia, and I like going to Australia, um, uh, Europe a lot. But I keep coming back to the United States. I just think we're blessed with a country that is hard to beat. You can go from the Maine coast out here to the Gulf of Mexico, way up to the rivers of Montana, and I think it's a. I just got my global entry TSA certification the other day, and I'm thinking, if I had my way, I wouldn't. I'm not going to be traveling internationally. You know, maybe go
We
back to see some friends in Australia, but
Yeah, we do
I'd
live in
rather
a
go.
beautiful country. We do live in a
Yeah,
beautiful
I'd,
country.
I'd rather hit the Green River of Utah or the Madison up in Wisconsin, up in Montana. Yeah,
That's neat.
yeah.
What's one trait or characteristic in somebody else that you admire that maybe you don't have yourself, or something you just when you see other people have this or act a certain way, you always admire that. Is there something you can think of?
I have empathy. I have some friends that are just really empathetic people, and I guess I'm just. I said, yeah. Why didn't I think of that? Why? And I have some friends that that guy's. Let's see if we can help that guy. And my first reaction is, well, screw that guy. He ain't my problem. But then I feel kind of ashamed of that and go. But some people are just naturally empathetic. I think. My wife is. She's the type that can just see somebody and just immediately finds that the person probably isn't doing too well and engages the person, and
Wow,
in 2 minutes finds out more how to help that person. And I'm a psychologist. I should be able to do that. I
that's
don't.
amazing. That's
Yeah, it
amazing.
is. There's some
Yeah,
people that just have that empathy capacity.
that's great.
Uh,
Last question: who is the most influential person in your life personally, and what is the reason why they're so influential to you?
oh boy. And again, that's changed at different stages of life. Obviously, my parents shaped the life for all us kids in our family. Uh, I've had
How
some
about how
coaches.
about the last 10 years? Who's somebody that just sticks out to your head as somebody that's
Well,
really
early in my career, uh, I had a person, Dr. Harold Russell, who was a retired Army colonel, psychologist, who was at the Tucson Police Department as their police psychologist. And I kind of got under his wing there a little bit. And he kind of mentored me and shaped, uh, exposed me to a lot of law enforcement type events and people that I probably wouldn't have. And that was very much important. You know, at this stage of my life, I have to tell you, my heroes are my kids. I really, you know, I'm rounding third, you know, at this stage of life, I'm in the bottom of the ninth. And so I look at my kids and I'm very proud of them. I'm very proud of the services they give to people and what they do and how they try to help their fellow humans. So they influence me. Yeah.
That's incredible. That's incredible. Well, Dr. Kevin Gilmartin, is there anything you're working on now? Any projects, books, or anything that you want to talk about that you find interesting, you want to share with others?
Uh, well, you know, I can't say I'm doing anything really innovative, just kind of more of the same. And, you know, seminars and getting out and getting people to, we like it when people read the book. You know, you mentioned the book, and there's some oddball stories that have just struck me. I'm fly fishing in a river in Oregon, and I'm it's the evening. I'm stepping out of the river, and I'm walking back to my pickup truck, maybe half mile, and a person walking down the trail. We kind of intersect, and he has that book in his backpack. And I said, "Can I ask you why you have that book?" And so it's a book about for police officers. I said, "Yeah, I'm familiar with the book." And I said, why do you have it fishing? We're in a remote river here. I can understand if you're in a psychology conference. And he says, we were just doing a peer support group, a trauma group down the river. And we teach cops who are traumatized how to fly fish as a way to get past it. And every so often, if they want to just kick back and get out of the water, they lean up against a tree. We give them, say, why don't you read this book here? I said, well, I'm just honored that. So, you know, getting the information, I guess if there is something, it's getting the information into non-traditional ways, uh, getting information to people who are doing equine therapy or canine therapy or fly fishing, just getting it out of the isolated 50-minute hour. You know, the doctor is in, come tell me your life and I'll help you into the real world of getting people out there uh, fishing, you know, riding horses, exercising, those types of things, broadening the scope of wellness.
Yeah, that's amazing. What a story. I mean, we all want to
It
feel,
was,
we all want to feel impactful to so that I imagine you were, feeling pretty good after that. That's amazing.
well, you know, I want to tell you another funny story on that. I'm at the FBI Academy and I'm teaching. At the time, the cafeteria was really tough to get a chair in. So I'm looking for a place to sit down, got my tray, and there's a guy sitting at the table by himself. I said, mind if I join you? And he said, no, sit down. So I sit down, I'm eating my dinner. His I think it was maybe it was breakfast, I guess. So then all of a sudden he breaks out that book, Emotional Survival. And I said, do you like that book? No, I didn't even look at it. I'm supposed to do a report on it today. He said, but I didn't. I went out into DC. We went to a ball game this weekend. I haven't even looked at the damn thing. And I was supposed to do a presentation on it at 10 o'clock this morning. So I said, oh, that's going to be good. And he goes, I said, you know, I wrote that book. He goes, you're shitting me. No, I said, I'm not. I wrote the book. And he goes, what are you doing at 10 o'clock this morning? So I said, well, I don't teach until 1300. So I said, so he gives me the classroom and I go by and he gets up to do his presentation and he says, I like this book so much. I brought the author here to address so I, you know, those kind of little encounters, you know, kind of make it worthwhile because I'm so appreciative of the stuff that cops and dispatchers and firefighters and veterans do. They just there's not that we can't do enough to thank them and to pay them back for everything that they have provided us. So,
Yeah, I agree. I agree, sir.
yeah.
So Emotional Survivor for Law Enforcement by Dr. Kevin Gilmartin is here. If there's a young cop watching this and you haven't heard of this book by chance, it is a short read. It is 100, let me see this, 100, less than 150 pages, chock full of insightful, ready to do, illuminating type of exercises to help regulate your emotions, stress management, calm yourself down. I understand why your hypervigilance is changing your emotional output and your physiological response to things. So highly recommend it. We'll put the description in the comments. And Kevin, I just want to say thank you.
Well, thank you, Jeff. Thank you very
Personally,
much.
we've been communicating for over a year, I believe, and you've been always good about, hey, I can't do it right now, but let me check in with you later.
Well,
And
thank you for what you do. And I'm hoping we've said something today that can help somebody.
I think so. I think we did. So all the best to you, sir, and looking forward to
All
seeing
right.
your success. Take care of yourself.
Take care. Be safe now.
Thanks.
All right.
You too.
Adios now.
Take
Bye-bye.
care. See you. Wow. That was awesome. Okay. Well, thank you very much.